Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tetracast. This is RPG Site's weekly podcast where we get the site staff together to talk about our favorite genre of video games. My name is Brian Vitale. Joining me today, I have Josh Torres.
Take me to the promised land, Sakaguchi.
We've got Adam Vitale.
Hello.
Chow Min Woo.
How's it going?
And James Glizio.
I can't believe I spent $200 on an Apple product to play Fantasian.
And that has been a story for the week. We've had a few of us diving into Fantasian, which released the second of its two parts this week. We don't know where George is. He is missing. If any of you have any details of his location, call in and let us know.
Yeah, that definitely get on our Discord and be like, okay, I found George. It sounds like in Fifth Avenue. Like,
is it the time to put George posters on milk jugs and stuff?
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you seen this man?
I've heard he's got a Psychonauts tattoo on his back shoulder blade or something like that. There, that's how you
identify what Kingdom Hearts tattoo does he have? It's somewhere.
Oh, he's got Sora. He's got Sora on one of his calves. There.
Okay.
Look for Sora
great.
On the lower leg of a skinny British man. And that is George.
If you're in Europe, any part of Europe, if you see a Kingdom Hearts tattoo on a lower calf, then let us know.
Anyways, okay, so welcome to another edition of the Tetracast. It has been kind of a weird week in terms of releases, in terms of new games. The surprise of the week was a slightly quick announcement of the second part of Fantasian, which I think a lot of us were initially expecting to be later in the year, like a September-October timeframe. But nope, it was slated to come out August 13th. And then on top of that, it decided to come out like a day or two early and be available for download and play. So a few of us have had a chance to poke at that. Obviously, some of us have been playing some other games leading into the week that we're eager to talk about. And then we've got a bunch of release dates for as we fill out the back half of the year with some ports, some surprise announcements, things like that. And then also, it's been a big week for details on the upcoming Tales of Arise. So that's kind of the slate for the week and what we'll be talking about. But I think we're going to be starting out with what Josh sort of incidentally introduced is Fantasian, which, if you're not aware of what this is the Mistwalker game on Apple Arcade, which has the talents of Sakaguchi and Uematsu on it. Released the first half of the game in April or so, March, April, earlier in the year. And now we've got the second half released just in this last week. So I know a few of us had already played the first half. Also, James, who had mentioned picking up the Apple TV to start right from the outset of Fantasian, playing through both parts consecutively. So since Josh and I have had the chance to speak to Fantasian a little bit on previous episodes of this podcast, maybe I'll hand it off to James to see what his impressions are going into the game. And I'm not sure how far he is either. So James, take it away.
He's smarter than both of us, I think.
Yeah.
He's just been on it.
Take it away, James.
Okay, so I basically started playing earlier this week. I was originally hoping to get to the cutoff point for when part 1 ends, before the update hit, but then the update dropped a day before I was expecting it to, a day before everyone else was expecting it to, even. When I was playing through the sections of the game that everyone already knew about, the first part, the thing that stood out to me was that the thing I kept thinking about anyway was I enjoyed it. The pacing at the very beginning is kind of slow. The gameplay, the battle system's kind of slow. The latter half of part 1, it really starts coming together. The battles get more interesting. Story gets more interesting. One thing I really appreciate about the battle system as a whole, and this obviously ties into part 2, but a lot of the bosses in the latter half of part 1 onward really have some unique mechanics to them, and they really start to get more difficult. Vam at the end of part 1, that was a pretty difficult boss fight because you really need to be on taking down his ads that he spawns, or else you're gonna have a really bad time.
I thought that the boss fights in part 1 of Fantasian were gimmicky, but in a good way. And I don't really have a good way to describe what is a good gimmick and what is a bad gimmick, but they involve systems of the battle system where it's if you want to have a good time against this boss, the one that I keep thinking of is the one that's kind of like the Chocobo Eater in Final Fantasy X, where he keeps trying to push you back, and there's a specific way that you need to prevent that using basically they kind of tutorialize it where it's you got a new character on your team. They have these sorts of abilities, which is a perfect counter to this boss fight. And it's not quite so simple as use that character, win button, you're done. But it involves those talents, those abilities, and involves it into a gimmick with how the boss works and how you damage them. And it's smart in a way where you don't just have like a go-to strategy where it's like, well, if I just do this strategy on this character, I win every fight I'm up against. You actually have to understand what the boss is doing, how you make them weak, how you like prevent them from damaging you. So you're right though that it does kind of take a while to ramp there. It's one of those games you just have to stick with it. By hour 5 or by hour 6, it does end up really kind of getting pretty involved and pretty
bosses.
Part two that's really impressed me already
Yeah.
with like it's some of the bosses. Like very early on, I won't spoil like the context of the boss fight, but there's this boss fight that you run into fairly early into part 2, where there's debris spinning around it. It's like a big rock formation.
Oh
like there's
yeah,
the-
I know.
yeah,
I know the one
yeah.
you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so
It is really cool. So if you remember, Brian, in Fantasian, when you cast a spell or you throw out like a special skill like Leo's like Fire Blade or something, there's like an actual trajectory to those spells, whether you create an arc, whether you do it, where they actually just travel to the boss. So so in this fight, as you're weakening it through phases, because it'll constantly shift through elements, and you have to think about, okay, what weak element is it weak to now? That debris will continue to crumble around it and like circle around it more quickly or in quantity. There's just debris falling off, and then
eventually you won't be able to use a spell to hit through the debris, and the only chance you're gonna have to attack it. Basically, this is like an enrage mechanic almost from like an MMO. When it charges up its ultimate attack, it'll raise the debris above the rest of the body. And so basically, for this boss in that last section, if you basically have to just throw everything you got at it, because if that attack hits you, you're basically gonna wipe.
So this is the interesting thing about this boss. Like, remember what I said about like like spells traveling. That debris, like early on, you see gaps in its debris, and you actually have to time when you're gonna press the cast command. Like, you have to actually time when you're actually gonna attack for that turn to get through those gaps and make sure that like there's a clear path towards whatever you're casting to that boss, or else it won't hit because there'll be the physical, I mean the mass of the debris will actually just be in the way. If you time it wrong, it won't take any damage. But as James was getting to, like as you know, there's more little parts of debris and it spins really fast. There'll be like this final phase where you think it's invulnerable, but it was an interesting like thing about it that I just barely played it last night, where there's actually very little minor gaps in that final phase. Where I had my Leo has a skill where sometimes if I cast like a support or an item on someone, he'll do like the fight command automatically, so at least he's still getting some DPS off of that turn. So he did that and is actually able to slip through that final phase of debris and still like hit the boss, even though it didn't do a lot of damage. I'm like, that's interesting. So there's actually, just by that one little interaction, it's like, oh, there's still a little minor gap here. Of course, you can wait for that phase where it raises the debris up, but from that little observation alone, it's like, oh, this is really cool because there's a way to still kind of do damage to this boss without the intended.
That's really interesting because
mechanic.
like none of the fights, if I recall correctly, in the first half of the game really involved timing. It's more
No,
like you.
they did.
Hmm?
There was that one boss in East events where they even tell you, though you might not remember it, that you could use Cheryl's attack at the right time when it's opening its mouth at its apex, and it'll deal extra damage.
Okay, my memory is it's been a few months. I do remember a bunch of the stuff about positioning and in terms of like having like the floating drones and you're trying to clear those out while attacking the main enemy. But I just don't remember. I'm glad that they doubled down on the timing aspect because it ends up being like a bunch of simple ideas in terms of like the arcs of the spells and the positioning of the main enemy behind certain ads or certain, sub enemies. And then involving the timing aspect and the travel speed of those spells or abilities, it ends up
And
becoming like
keep in mind that one boss fight, it really ties into like the elemental stuff too, because when it has different elements active, it'll only really take a decent amount of damage from the specific element that element is weak to. So it's like,
I do remember it was very critical to make sure you had like your elements covered, and for most of the party members, they have like a key element that's kind of like their specialty. Like for Leo, it's fire, and for Cheryl, it's ice, and things like that. But it'd be interesting to see how you'll have like 6 or 7 party members, but have it where you can only have 3 at a time, and having to make sure that you have whatever elements covered needed for any specific boss encounter. Here, I have a question for you two that are further in the game. So far through part 1, the way that the story is set up and it progresses, you never really have true say in who your party is. It's kind of just determined by where characters are in the story. Is that still the case for part 2, or does it get to a point where you kind of get to pick out of a set?
I'll handle this one. So where part 1 leaves off, it's not really a super big cliffhanger. Like things were happening at the cusp end of it. Wasn't like, oh my gosh, the things open up really fast at Fantasian Part 2 because from that point, obviously I'm not going to spoil anything, but they kind of ease you in again with like, okay, you're kind of back in this the starting town area, and then Leo is at a point in where he's with 2 other party members, but he was separated from 2 others at the end of part 1. It's like, okay, well, first things first, I'm gonna go find them again. So you get like, interestingly enough, it's very different from the get-go from where part 1 leaves off, which is a very linear experience. They give you several story quests at once. It's like, okay, there were these 2 things that crashed into this the capital and here to the northeast area or northwest area to this tundra region, and that's like a new area, one of the new areas to go to. So it leaves it to you to decide what order of story quests do I want to tackle these in, because you're at this point you're just trying to get like your party members back, and once you start getting those party members back, you now have a party of more than 3, and now you have like complete control over what your party makeup will be. The really cool thing I like about Fantasian Part 2 is the way it handles its party switching mechanic, because once you get some of your people back into your party, let's say I have 4 in my party, you have 3 on field, 1 in the back line. Everyone still gains experience from battle, no matter what, equal amounts of experience. There's no lesser experience or whatnot. And in mid battle, if you want to switch to your other party member, remember Leo has like a warp device to fast travel, so that's how they contextualize. Oh, we'll just warp in another person in this battle, and it doesn't consume a turn. It like if you want to if you want to switch out the robot dude with Ez, which is like the thief, the robot dude will just say, hey, change to easy or Ez, and then it'll still have Ez turn. You're still operating that turn without sacrificing a turn. And you can even switch back if you're like, say, oh, I didn't want to switch back to the robot guy. So you can just really switch them back and forth without consuming a turn. So in that way,
it's Final Fantasy X, which I'm basically grinning right now because I'm like, thank God.
yeah. So you're still utilizing, the full breadth of abilities and equipment on your party and whatnot. So you're in mid battle. You're thinking about not only when am I going to switch people in, but remember in Fantasian, since you can, since the arc of your abilities and spells can vary depending on your character's physical position in your party, depending on like if they're in the 3rd slot, the arc of their spells will alter a different way because of their placement. Now you're starting to think about that element of like, okay, I want to change this party member because they're in this certain slot, and because of that slot I can now curve this spell that way and hit more enemies that way, and that's really, really cool.
Yeah, like this is me kind of conjecturing in my head, having not played part 2, but like Cheryl might be more suited for being in the center because she does more AoE, where you might want to have someone like Leo on the edge where they can do across the diagonal of the field and hit more of the enemies. But of course it depends on the layout of the enemies and whatever new spells you get in part 2. So no, so it's like Final Fantasy X, only unlike Final Fantasy X, you don't have to switch people in to get them experience. The fact that they just get it all by default is really nice.
Yeah, and obviously, like at the end of part 1, there's not really a spoiler because they already showed it in trailers, whatnot. But like near the end of part 1, you start gaining access to like skill trees for your party members. Like only Leo gets like at the end of part 1, but as more and more characters are like reintroduced in this one, they get access to their skill trees too through certain story events, and it's really cool. Like we found out back then when we were playing part 1 that when you're filling out these skill trees, You can also refund all your skill points back without any. You don't have to use an item. You can do it freely at any time, and then each of these skill trees has like a specialty for like some characters may have like you want to use do you want this character to be focused on like DPS grenades because Easy has like grenade skills? Do you want to be focused on that, or do you want them to focus on buffing and debuffing and whatnot? And you might be in a situation where you're up against like a certain tough fight. And it's like, okay, let me actually reshuffle my skills and my skill trees and think about like a better strategy for this. So there's a lot of like customization that you're given already on the offset of part 2. Like I'm not really that far into it, but I'm really impressed that everything feels flexible now. I don't feel so corralled into this like linear story path, and you even have like agency over where you want to go next, and then proceed from there. I think the one weakness so far is because it has this open story structure now. It's kind of similar to like how the way Final Fantasy VI progresses, like having a linear first part and then the other half of the game is like a lot more open. The I think what I'm worried about, because it kind of peeked its head over a little here and there, is depending on what party members you decide to get first. Obviously, the story scenes aren't flexible enough to take into account that you have this party member now and you went to go rescue that one. So they always have like that party member that you rescued first. They won't be in the story scenes for the other one because they didn't account for that. So hopefully that's just like a little minor thing that like now that I have most of my members back, hopefully that now they're going to be all more involved in like whatever happens next. So that's kind of a little thing. It's like, oh well, this character didn't show up in this cutscene for now because the story had to account for whether I rescued them first or second, etc.
Yeah, they don't even show up in the rear, and they just don't speak. They just literally don't appear.
Not from what I remember.
So that's unfortunate, but hopefully it's just for that section of the game. Like, I guess the go-to comparison here is like Final Fantasy VI World of Balance, World of Ruin stuff, where hopefully like once you get past that arc at the beginning of part 2, obviously then it's no longer a factor. So it would have been really cool to see if they'd had pre-planned for like the permutations about even if they had just like a generic line to say like, oh, you could have had Cheryl at this point or Kina at this point, but oh well.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how that unfolds. But other than that, I'm really excited to keep on going. This is an experience that'll be probably unique to you and me, Brian, where there was like a good maybe 20 to 30 minutes when I first picked it. It's like, okay, I have to like relearn how to ride this bicycle. How did this battle system work again? And there's kind of like a readjustment period because there's no real tutorialization or anything for like returning players. So when I went to go reload my save, it's like you're still using the same save file. It's just I had to go through like the little story summaries they give you out of like the events in the story section, and like kind of remembering the context, and then relearning like, okay, this is how the dimension mechanics work. This is how like spells work and whatnot. So there's a little bit of an adjustment period of like, okay, how does this game work again? But when was the last time you played this game? I can't remember now. Like April, I want to say.
Yeah, like I said, it was like March or April. I don't.
Yeah,
feels like longer than that. We're still at the time of we're still in like the space where time feels weird with all the real life happenings and other stuff, and how front loaded this year was in terms of releases as well. And now we're kind of in more of a dry period, so it's actually a really, really good time for Fantasian Part 2 to land. I think it could have easily like fallen through the cracks if it did end up releasing like late October or November. So I do actually think that this is earlier than anyone expected, but it's a kind of
this was really nice the prime time for it. This was the perfect time for it.
Yeah, I think James, it came out at a good time.
So James, I just want to make sure we kind of get your final thoughts. As I know you're not done with it yet, but just in general, like how do you feel about what you've played in terms of like the presentation of the game, or just the story premise, or if it felt awkward going straight from part 1 to part 2 without any gaps?
No, actually, I feel like it's very clear that the game was designed to be the full package in the first place, because you don't get that credit sequence anymore. It's just completely axed entirely. It's just, unless somebody told you specifically where the gap was between part 1 and part 2, you probably wouldn't know it now. You probably just wouldn't know.
That's interesting.
But I've been really enjoying it so far, and honestly, the story has been surprisingly good too. Like, so Fantasian's story isn't deep, I'd say, but I really do enjoy some of the memories, which are basically like the kind of Lost Odyssey, like,
Thousand
um,
Year Door type deal. The
yeah.
text adventures.
It's not Thousand Year Door, Thousand Years of Dreams.
Like Thousand Year Door, like that one RPG.
Also a great game, but quite different.
But one thing that I know that a lot of people are worried about going into part two was that a lot of folks said, and I can see what they meant, that part one of its greatest strengths was, yeah, at the very beginning, like maybe the battles and the stories was a bit slower paced, but once you really got into it, there was like a nice clip of character like backgrounds, like really touching story moments, even like between the cast and whatnot. And a lot of folks I saw were worried about, like, okay, so part two is going to be more quest focused. How's that going to impact the story? And yet you have all these side quests that I'm sure some of these that Josh hasn't done that tie either directly into the main story or they'll give you these little scenes that you might not have like run into anyways. After you get a certain character back, they realize that they've lost an item that's kind of precious to them. In the process of getting it back, you have to find something to trade for it to another like NPC. I don't want to talk about this because I want Josh to be able to see this for himself. But
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to go deep into anything right now because it just barely came out. A lot of people are excited too. We don't want to
Well, I will
spoil
say
anything
though
for them.
that having the discussion on it right now is making me like I've been kind of dragging my feet. Like, oh, part two, I better re-up my Apple Arcade subscription or trial and get back to it. And now I'm more energized to do that now after hearing you
yeah,
guys talk about it.
it's definitely too early to say. But I feel like if the rest of the game is as good as part two has been so far, Fantasian's going to be really high up there in our game of the year thing at the end of the year. That's the feeling I'm getting. I'm not
I
sure how
remember.
Josh feels, but
I'm interested to see where it'll land. Like, I think a lot of what hinges upon the game for me is how where it lands. And does it I hope it doesn't fumble like the final stretch of it. But I think the game is already noteworthy because of the unique way it was made, like the unique dioramas and whatnot. Especially the new tundra area, I was really impressed by some of the effects and attention to
yeah.
detail that went into that region. So I think it's already noteworthy for
Uematsu's-
that alone.
sorry.
And yeah, Uematsu's OST is just fantastic in it.
I think one of my main takeaways from the early part of the game was how well they gave each character like voice in terms of the way their dialogue is presented, even though there is no voice acting. So part of me feels like
there was voice acting for a second.
No, there is no voice acting, but just the way that certain characters speak in their text is done pretty well. Where like Cheryl is obviously has a different upbringing to Kina. Did I say Kira earlier? I meant Kina. Where they have basically opposite upbringings and they speak very differently. So there's some times where I wonder if the game would be elevated with voice acting, but it does a really strong job even in its absence. So I'm interested to see like how things escalate in terms of character development, storytelling, and just like the plot itself was really starting to ramp up and really kind of they picked a good spot for it to cliffhang at for those of us who did have the gap between part one and part two. I thought it had the potential to be in the upper part of like our end of year deliberations. So I'm really curious to see if part two kind of fulfills that potential and if it sticks the landing. We will probably follow up either next week or the week after once we get more. I know there's other than us three, there's other people on staff that have been really eager to play through the game. Some of us from part one and some of us from the very beginning. Keep your eyes out for that. Another game that we had brought up previously on a podcast, not quite as far back as April, but a few weeks ago, was something that Josh had been putting some time into, and that was Dodgeball Academia. Now, the first time that we had a chance to talk about this, you'd only just sunken your teeth into it. You had kind of just talked about the general premise and some of the challenges you were having with it. Have you finished it since then, or have you just continued to put some more time into it? What are your follow-up thoughts on Dodgeball Academia?
Yeah, I finished it a few weeks ago. But since I had other things going on in life, it took me a while to get to it. By the time, either by the time this is out, or maybe it's already out, I'll probably have a review up. It's almost done, and it's a cute little game. It's from Pocket Trap. It's a indie studio in Brazil, and it's kind of a weird marriage of dodgeball and RPG mechanics, and the way how are how they translate dodgeball like systems into an RPG format. I mentioned this a few weeks back about the premise. You have this character named Otto. He attends this dodgeball school, and the beginning of the game is really funny because like they have this hero's dodgeball that's lodged in stone, and whoever touches it, they kind of awaken like the potential for like getting dodgeball powers essentially. So everyone has like a super move in that game where Otto has like a Shinku Hadoken from Street Fighter. Mina has like you can summon lightning bolts from the sky and whatnot. You even have like a healer character, and they fulfill that role. And how battles are done in this is up to three versus three people can participate in a single dodgeball match. And unlike the sport of dodgeball, of if when you get a single hit on you, you're out. Everyone has a life meter on them, so they can take several hits before they go down. When they go down, they're either excluded from the rest of the match, or they go behind enemy lines because some rules of dodgeball allow for this, where they can still assist from behind enemy lines when they're knocked out. And it's really just a cute little RPG that I mentioned last time. It has like a Saturday morning cartoon vibe to it. And then what you're doing around the school is you're trying to win this tournament because Otto's parents come from a line of referees, and then Otto's dad comes after him and he's like, "Hey, what happened? Why are you ditching this? You can't just ditch this. What the hell are you doing?"
Referees, like
Yep.
lineage. Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And it's like, and then Otto's like, I want to become a dodgeball player. I don't want to become a referee anymore. It's like Otto's dad's like, all right, I'll let you off the hook only if you win this tournament.
Wow.
Like, okay, well, sure. So that becomes his overall goal in the game, is to win this tournament. Along the way, he'll meet like new teammates along the way, and it's really funny how you get across like this overworld, because you're just it's a small little like section. You have this school, and then to the north of it is like a forest. To the northeast of it is like a tundra region, and then and then you have this underground super area too that you sort of navigate.
Tundra region near a school.
Yep, there's a northeast. There's like a cable car that you can take from the school to this tundra ice region.
I like how it's like they have an RPG, they have an idea for an RPG, but they want to make it like quirky and like, why can't an RPG center around the sport of dodgeball? But we're still going to have like the ice area. We're still going to.
Yeah.
Have you ever played Super Kunio Dodgeball?
Yeah, I have. I actually mentioned it in my review. It's like one of when I think of a dodgeball game, that's the first thing I think of. The Kunio-kun dodgeball game is sick as hell. I really enjoyed that. But there's been other like recent dodgeball games like Knockout City has been doing really well. People seem to really enjoy that. And yeah, so you have, as you're going around like the school and other areas, like you can make Otto literally spin up like Sonic. He has like a Sonic spin dash, and has like a sound effect that's very close to that spin dash sound effect. It's just to go around that school and other regions that much faster, because you're trying to get from place to place, and everything's clearly marked on the map. It also has influence from the Pokemon series, where that you don't get into like random encounters, but there are other players around the school that have like a fist icon by them. And then if they see you, they kind of go, "Hey, what are you doing? Let's go play a dodgeball match." And goes,
You get their money when you beat them too.
yeah, you do get money. Yeah, you get like 30 cents off of these people, and then like big fights, you'll get like $2. And it's like, yeah, it's really funny because they like when you're going through like school, you don't have a lot of money, so it's kind of the economy of this game is kind of reflects that. It's like, oh, you want to try to buy a candy bar? All right, it's $1.50. It's like, oh man, but I only have like $3 on me. Do I really want this candy bar to like raise my health? So, and it's also cool too when with each consumable, because everyone has like are either loves, likes, is neutral on, or dislikes the like certain consumables. So if you feed them something like they like, it'll do like a certain amount. But if they love it, like say a health item, and it heals for 10 HP. If they like it, it's like okay, cool, all 10 HP, let's go. But if they love it, it might heal like 15 HP. But if they dislike it, it might heal like only 7 or 6 or whatnot, depending on how much they dislike it. And one of the really cool little touches about it is um, one of the characters, Suneko, she's lactose intolerant, so there'll be certain consumables that she just cannot have because she's lactose intolerant. So it's kind of a like a cool little building out that character in subtle ways as well. And this game becomes really insane because when you're translating RPG mechanics into dodgeball, you can have a lot of fun with it. So there are characters that could like infuse elements into like their dodgeball throws. So Otto can like if he does a charge throw, he can like infuse fire into that dodgeball, and then if it hits someone, it inflicts the burn status on them. Or if you inflict shock on the dodgeball, it'll like stun them for a bit. And then there'll be on top of that, certain characters can throw the dodgeball in different ways. So Balloony, kind of like the white mage of your party, he has like healing skill. When he eventually he learns a skill where he can throw the dodgeball and it travels circular. So it's kind of like it's not really following the physics of dodgeball anymore. It's just like it's just traveling very slow, but in a very circular motion to them. And sometimes you want to throw it slow because both your characters and enemies alike can either catch or counter dodgeballs right back at you, just an immediate counter attack, like kick it back at you. And so you wanna have to change the timing of your throws to either be a fast throw or a slower throw to kind of trip them up a little.
Does the game make any attempt to like ground these elements into like something more real, or is it just like no, just go with it? The dodgeball's on fire now.
That's how they contextualize it is because like this hero's dodgeball in the beginning when Otto touches, like it gives him this power of like to do like really. It's basically like giving you magic with dodgeballs essentially. So there'll be characters like one of like your rivals. He's like the hero's dodgeball won't acknowledge me. It won't give me any power. I can't believe this. He's just really pissed off that he doesn't have like any cool powers, which is I get it.
Man, I almost thought it was like the kid's imagination or something.
No, this is all real. This is as real as it can get. And then there'll be you have an equipment system. You can equip like armor or certain things that use so things that'll like maybe charge your super meter faster or give you more defense or give you more agility to run around the court faster and whatnot.
What are some example armors? Is it like stuff that would be like suited in universe, like Letterman jacket or
yeah. So like it could be like a skull ring where you have to like sacrifice some of your health, but you'll get a lot of power out of it, and then it's just a lot of little trinkets and items that you might find like, around the school and whatnot. It's not like sometimes you'll get like golden socks, and then these golden socks give you like raised agility and attack as long as you don't get hit.
Gaudy class ring.
Yep, pretty much. Yeah. So and it's this game has no voice acting, but you remember back a few months ago when we were like criticizing Fantasian for its text adventures for not really playing around with its text too much the way that Lost Odyssey did, like they even animate the text. And this game is really full of personality when it comes to animating that text. Like if someone's like one of the first NPCs you beat has like a very surfer dude kind of vernacular, so his text is like more wavy. It's animating that waviness to his text, and it's it gives a bit of more attitude to it. It is really nice, which I really enjoyed.
That actually is where a 1,000-year door reference might work, because that game does similar stuff with text.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's how they do a lot of their characters and give them their personality through text.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is a really neat, cute game that I think anyone who really likes dodgeball would like to see how that translates into an RPG. They should check this out. It's a really cute, charming game. I think that there's a lot of creative stuff that they put into this game to just kind of it exudes that amount of like, that's a really cool, neat idea that like I would have never thought of like when you're thinking about dodgeballs and RPGs.
I was thinking about something. You know that level 5 soccer game Do you remember
Inazuma 11, I think.
Yeah, does that have a lot of RPG elements to it, or is this like a soccer game?
I know I had never really played it in Inazuma 11 games. I can't speak to how RPG it is. I know it is like filled with like Captain Tsubasa type like crazy over the top moves. I know that's like very it's
According
not
to
like true
Wikipedia
to
page, Inazuma 11 is a role-playing sports video game for the Nintendo
oh
DS.
shit. There you
Wow.
go. Yeah,
It's
there
time
you
for
go.
Josh to sink into one of those games.
Well, make level 5 ever come out with a game here again, and then we'll be start talking again. And I think the weakest parts about this game is that it kind of drags on for too long, especially in the final stretch where they're just like, "Oh, you did you done something, but there's something else." And then as you're doing something else, there's like, let's say like for example, there's something that happens at the school, and you have to go find the principal. But then when you have to go find the principal, his door is locked, and it's like, I don't know which keys to use. So it's like there's three separate keys and three separate classrooms that you have to all gather before you come back here and go find out which key unlocks the principal's room. And it's like, this really didn't need to be here. This is like kind of more filling it out and just kind of wasting your time. But it's not the biggest deal. I think my favorite side quest in this game though is you find this dude in the bathroom, the school bathroom, and it's like, what are you doing here? He's like, hey, you want to go play like imaginary dodgeball? I'm like, what the fuck? Yeah, let's go play imaginary dodgeball. And then it goes into this like turn-based battle system. Like, this is the only time you ever see this in the game. Like, imagine what dodgeball would be with a turn-based battle system, but you're playing imaginary dodgeball. So like
In the bathroom.
so yep, in the bathroom. So you have these commands of like throw, guard, and you're trying to get like 3 successful hits before one of you is eliminated. So you're literally just playing imaginary dodgeball in your heads with a turn-based command system. Imagining what this game would look like with that. It's really funny. It's really goofy. I'm like, all right, sure, why not? And one of the other side quests that I like is there's this persistent side quest throughout the entire game, but it's easy to like. It's not easy to miss, but it's easy to just like, you know, kind of for it not to like enter your head, even though it's like clearly marked on the map. Where there's this dude who like you have to fight once a day, and like this game spans over like 8 days, I believe. So there's like persistent side quests where you have to always make sure to like follow up with this guy. It's like, okay, I'm gonna beat you now. I'm gonna beat you now. It's always like a different kind of like type of fight, like different like modifiers might be in play where he might only have 1 HP, but he's very hard to hit because like maybe like dodgeballs are surrounding him and it's hard to penetrate through that shield or whatnot, for example. But you just have to get that one hit. It's like different stuff like that. So it's just it has goofy side quests, and like a really fun, vibrant tone to it. It's cool, and I recommend that if you know if whatever I said sounds somewhat appealing to you, definitely check it out.
It's on Game Pass. I feel like I'm obligated to say that for some reason.
Oh,
This
okay, is it? That's
this
cool.
podcast
Yeah.
is not supported by Game Pass.
Oh, it should be.
Well, I wanted to take a minute here to talk about a game that I've been playing, mainly because I brought it up on previous podcasts. It's not a new release, but I had mentioned previously a desire to finish out the Yakuza series this year because I kind of skipped ahead to play Yakuza 7, which is obviously Like a Dragon here in the West, which is obviously a big RPG release for us last year. And I had a gap where I had not played about half of the other Yakuza games. So I had made it kind of a personal goal of mine to go back through those. On the docket, I still had to play through Yakuza's 5 and 6. And I'm finally working my way through Yakuza 5. And unfortunately, if you're a fan of Yakuza 5, either skip ahead or grit your teeth. I am not. So I've loved Yakuza 7, Like a Dragon. I really liked Yakuza 1. Even though it's limited. Yakuza 0 is one of my favorites. I found even 3 pretty damn charming, even though it is a bit of a adjustment going from some of the newer remakes like the Kiwami games into Yakuza 3, which only has a remaster. Yakuza 5, I am really struggling to get through. I am feeling like I am playing it out of obligation. I'm feeling like I kind of set a goal for myself to get through it, and that's my motivating factor. I am just not really having fun. For those that aren't, invested in the series, Yakuza 5 is probably kind of the most ambitious of the first 6/7 games in terms of how many locations you visit, how many characters are involved, the different sorts of gameplay mechanics that they throw in, some well thought out, some very, very rudimentary and not very fun at all. Unfortunately, like I have probably not had a less enjoyable experience playing a game in a long while, which kind of sucks because I enjoyed so many other games in the series so much, and Yakuza 5 I am just really not feeling in terms of what they're doing with the story. It feels like it's very, very scatterbrained in terms of what character interactions they involve when they introduce new characters when I don't think they need to. And then also just in terms of gameplay, they just shove basically Yakuza 5 follows up on the trend of Yakuza 4 where it involves multiple protagonists. You're not just playing as Kiryu. And with each protagonist, they kind of change up what sort of side stories they're involved in, you know, and what sort of mini games are available to them, what sort of areas they initially have access to. It just seems very, very like kitchen sink approach. And I feel like the game is much weaker for that.
Yeah, a lot of people have that same opinion. I think one of the things I heard about it, I think the Haruka segments drove this player insane from what I heard from her.
So yeah, that's a key part is that obviously this is the first and only game in the series so far where you play as Haruka, who is a very major character in the series. So like the fact that she's playable here on its face is fine. And the way that her primary gameplay mechanic is through like dance battles or singing mini games, which I also think is fine. Like on its face, like okay, that's an okay idea to involve that character into the story that way. The only problem I think really is that A, kind of drags on for too long. B, there's not a lot of variety. Like it's one of those things where you first hear like the first major song that she sings as part of her like quest to become an idol, but you end up hearing the same song like 4 or 5 or more times, depending on how many sub-stories you do. Some of the sub-stories in this game, which normally sub-stories in Yakuza games are like where you get like the wacky side stories or like kind of clever like twists in terms of something that starts out wacky but ends up being pretty poignant, things like that. But for Haruka, a lot of times it's like, why don't you sing that same song that you've heard 6 times in this location of the city, standing on a beer crate or stuff like that. And it's just like gets really old really fast. And on top of that, the game takes forever to tie her story into like the overarching narrative. It feels like anime filler the first 80% of when it introduces her and her chapter. And that's kind of a problem I think the game has generally, where you jump from character to character and it just takes too long for it to like figure out why is this relevant? Why is this interesting? And that's something that it didn't have to be that way. A lot of times my favorite parts in video games and in RPGs in general is when they have these side stories that aren't directly tethered to the main plot or aren't exactly like it may not push the narrative forward, but it might show you like a side of the character you haven't seen before or give them the chance to interact in environments that the main story hasn't allowed it to. But I just think Yakuza 5 just doesn't do it that well. One of the characters you play as is Taiga Saejima, who also appeared in Yakuza 4 and in later games. And it doesn't do anything interesting with his character. It kind of just goes through like the same sorts of story beats that it already went through in Yakuza 4. So I just feel like this isn't interesting. I've already sort of seen this. I feel kind of bad that I like felt like, oh, time to talk about Yakuza 5 and how much I'm not gelling with it. But there are certain...
Hey man, it has to be said. It has to be said.
For what it's worth, I don't think your opinions are like completely against the grain. I've heard similar, that the game is just like too long, too many sections that don't really come together and things like that. So I have heard these sorts of, comments before. Obviously, I'm not saying everybody agrees with that, but it's not like you're just some outlier here.
Yeah, I was talking with Brian earlier, and I was thinking of like, what do people really like about 5? Because it feels like a very disjointed, overlong, stretching game. And I guess for the time when you're thinking about what you want out of a video game, Yakuza 5 is definitely the most video game out of the Yakuza games, outside of like maybe 7. Where at that time, when you think about all the Yakuza games prior to it, it felt like RGG Studios, like, we want to just have all of Yakuza but in one game. And it's like, okay, well, and it felt like any idea that came to their desk during the Yakuza 5's development, they're like, yes, we should include that. Yes, we should include that. Saejima imagining the city and going through it. Yes, we'll put it there. It's like, oh man, this 5 really, really needed to like cut a good chunk of the content out, but people really want content in their games. If you want quantity over quality, 5 might be the game for you because they sure put in a lot of things. Should we have a hunting mini game in this game? Yes. Are you sure?
Forget about
Yes.
taxi driver.
I was watching Brian do the hunting part, like he was just streaming it one night, and he spent like 4 hours just doing hunting in a Yakuza game. Like, okay, sure.
And the thing is that, like,
miserable.
if they had lessened the number of things, the number of kitchen sinks in this weird pot, I think they could have made some of them compelling, but some of them just feel so thin. Where when you're doing this game, in all the Yakuza games, sorry, I'm getting the thoughts together, have sub stories, and that's kind of like something that I really, really enjoy about them, because they take like the serious crime genre and allow it to like have that levity, kind of have this like kitschy, wacky sort of feeling that they kind of pair alongside. And this is something you sort of see in some other developers, like I think Machine Games have sort of had the similar sort of dynamic between serious storytelling and kind of like wacky, goofy alongside. You can end up being paired together pretty well. But then Yakuza 5 also introduces side stories, not sub stories or sub events, where Kiryu is a taxi driver, or Saejima goes hunting, or Haruka does her dancing things. It's just that each one, I feels like, didn't get the attention it deserved to really be compelling. Like, one of Haruka's sub events in her side story of becoming an idol is handshaking mini games, where she's like at a meet and greet and people will come up to her, and the whole mechanic of this is you just hold the X button to shake someone's hand until you see like the bouncer going to like shoo the line away because they're like crowding the line or taking too much time. And that's the extent of the mini game, is you hold one button for like 5 seconds, then you let go, then you hold the button for like 5 seconds, then you let go, and it's not interesting at all. And if you want to like see her story through to completion, you've got to do that like 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And then that's just one example. The hunting also gets really thin, where it's just like you hunt either rabbits, deer, or bear, and that's it. You do that 4 times each. And then taxi driving is pretty thin too. It's like if they had cut 2 of those out and made one system where maybe all the characters got involved in a certain sort of mini game, that changed how, like, gave it a little bit more meat to the bone or something like that, maybe it could have been interesting. But right now it just feels like really diversionary, really thin, not that compelling.
Yeah, I'm remembering that they need to have you do a whole tutorial about learning about traps and hunting now too.
Yeah. So if you haven't played the Yakuza series, don't get into 5 until you're in the same mind space I am, and you're in like completionist mode, where you're like, all right, I kind of want to know like what happened here so that I can carry it forward into like a Dragon and future entries. But as a standalone game, I'm unfortunately just not enjoying it.
I'm curious to hear about Brian's thoughts as he moves forward, because we haven't even touched like the brand new protagonist at the very end. And his whole deal. Oh,
yeah,
man.
I'm almost to the last protagonist of Yakuza 5, who, as far as I know, appears here and nowhere else. So kind of like one of the protagonists in Yakuza 4, who appears there and nowhere else for some reasons that are external to the game. Hopefully it's interesting in a vacuum, but we'll see. Go ahead, Chow.
I was gonna say, is it the cop playable in 4? And I remember he got
there was some sort of drama involving that
the actor,
face actor, and we saw some of this with Judgment, where one of the actors there had issues with I don't know the details, and I'm not going to guess for fear of getting it wrong, but basically just with their agencies and with their talent contracts, if they end up having some of these investigations, it becomes very difficult to continue using their face models and their voice actors in the future games, so they end up kind of just being withheld to the one game they originally appeared in. So
you know how it is, Chow. If you're accused of dealing with drugs in Japan and you're convicted,
your career is done.
Yeah, you none of your things exist anymore.
Yeah, they redo the face model, and then like if you play the PC version of Yakuza 4, you can actually like mod in the original face and
wait
voice.
a second. Wasn't the Yakuza 4 like situation? Wasn't the guy like not even like convicted?
I don't remember the details, but it was something like he was convicted, or he was charged but not convicted. He ended up getting like not guilty verdict or whatever. But it doesn't matter, I guess, in some respects.
Yeah, even if you're just charged, like as long as like you're under that public eye, and even if you come away innocent, you still have that stigma on you, and that's just
fucked up.
That's just the cultural norms there.
Yeah, I remember this one actress I really liked. I remember she got into like this huge scandal because her husband was involved in drugs, but she didn't do anything. But her career is basically destroyed from it. I think her name was Noriko Sakai.
I don't remember, dude.
Okay, but yeah, she was really famous in the
that
90s.
sounds, yeah, that sounds familiar, but
But yeah, it was like it was her husband's fault, but hey, it's like shit happens, you know.
Speaking of actors and actresses, it was really cool to see a character, Romy Park. It has a big role in Yakuza 5. So I don't like the story she's in, but good voice actor, good actress. So that was cool. There.
Which character does she play in there?
She plays Haruka's basically instructor / like agent. So yeah. Going into stuff up on the site from the last week, we do have a couple of features, some of which are exciting and interesting about upcoming games, and one of which was something I actually wasn't expecting us to have a feature on, but it appeared anyway. So something that came up in the last couple of weeks was a new Netflix Monster Hunter film called Legends of the Guild. We kind of talked about this very briefly, how it features a character from the series that I guess is named Aiden. And I don't know if maybe James can elaborate on this. He's in Monster Hunter World as like excitable A-lister, but I guess in other entries he is named as a more fully featured character. And he is the protagonist of this new film, Legends of the Guild. Though I don't know how much interest there is in the Monster Hunter fan base to have like these characters appear in these stories, or how much excitement there was over this film. But luckily for us, maybe one of our contributors decided to watch the film and write up on it so that you don't have to, I suppose, or we don't have to. So Paige did write up a feature up on the site for this Netflix movie, basically calling it a weird, breakneck-paced, interesting-looking movie that probably shouldn't have left the hub. I don't know if anyone else has any comments or any interest in seeing this movie at all. We do have a write-up from Paige. Yeah, it was kind of interesting because when we were looking at this movie, we saw it was kind of in our wheelhouse. We have sort of covered these sorts of things before. And one of our editors asked some of us if we were interested in covering this, those of us that have played Monster Hunter games, and we're like, no, this really just doesn't interest us. And the one person who did watch it kind of said, no, you're not missing much by skipping on this. So we do have that up on the site if you're morbidly curious about some thoughts on Legends of the Guild.
Where's our write-up? Where's Ox's write-up of the Dragon's Dogma Netflix show, dude?
Yeah, that was something that kind of came and went, where like he is probably the biggest Dragon's Dogma fan I know. And then we had that weird like announcement for a Netflix show, and then it just like disappeared from the face of the earth. Like I don't think I heard anything about it, good or bad. It just didn't even resonate.
I watched really like bad. 5 or 6 episodes. I was like, I can't do this. It's pretty bad.
Has Netflix had a hit yet in terms of any of these adaptations of video game IPs or anime IPs? Because I know like the Ghost in the Shell thing.
Does the Resident Evil thing count?
Does what count?
The Resident Evil CGI movies.
Those never count, but they still make a shitload of money. Yeah, I guess like the only one is like Witcher in recent memory, but that's not an action adaptation.
Well, Castlevania.
Yeah, Castlevania. Yeah.
Go ahead, Adam.
The weird thing about this Monster Hunter thing is that it was announced in 2018, and I think like literally just everybody forgot about it. Because when they announced this movie or this, I think they called it an anime at the time, they didn't like reveal any information about it other than like it exists and we're making it. And I think pretty much everyone just forgot about it until just sort of randomly last month, Capcom's just like, hey, it's
here it is.
Out. Yeah, here it is.
I guess everyone was right then. All right, Chow. Time for the real big deal. When's your write-up of the all 4 Evangelion films that just hit Amazon Prime?
Never happening. I hated the original series, so it's not happening.
It's just that Monster Hunter is not. I've only played Worlds. I don't want to speak like an expert, but it's not a narrative-driven series, is my estimation, and it never was. So deciding that to be the IP that you make a Hollywood movie out of, and B an anime-ish 3CG adaptation out of, just seems like a weird pairing from the outset.
I think I'm not going to say the most successful, but I guess the most true to spirit one was probably that 70 episode anime series for Monster Hunter Stories, I'm going to guess. Probably.
Yeah, I guess Stories is kind of their attempt to make it more of like a narrative-driven RPG. So having a story-specific anime actually does seem like it would work on paper. So
I didn't realize that Monster Hunter Stories anime was like 70 episodes. Like 13.
Didn't even know it existed.
Yeah, dude. It was like
I'm gonna
Ride
guess
On
they're
or
hoping
something.
it'd be like a Pokemon.
Probably. Yeah, it was definitely aimed for like way younger audiences around that age.
We also have some features up on the site, perhaps more interestingly, for the upcoming Tales of Arise. Obviously, this is a big RPG landing. Is it next month? Is it in September?
Yep.
Yep, the 10th.
Yeah, so lots of new information coming out of a bunch of the marketing from the last couple of weeks. Let's roll through them. So first off, we were able to go have one of our contributors, Scott, go hands-on with it again. I think this is the second time we've had someone able to play through a preview developer build of the game. Earlier, George was able to do it a few months ago.
Being very proactive about that, making sure that like the marketing cycle for this game is just like it's always relevant, it's always in the know. Like they're really going for it.
Yeah, and we've just gone through like a few weeks of weekly character bios, and which obviously I think works for a very character-driven party-based RPG like this. And now we have basically this preview hands-on alongside the announcement of a console demo, which is coming out next week on August 18th. So essentially, we expect that basically it was just kind of early access to the demo. So Scott was able to go hands-on and write up some of his thoughts on it. So this is kind of a feature up on the website. Mostly positive. Scott is a big Tales of fan. He's been really eager to see. Obviously, it's been a few years since the last entry. The few things that he kind of had reservations about were things called cure points. And Adam was actually able to follow up on this new mechanic in Tales of Arise with an interview with one of the Bandai Namco producers of the game. Since we don't have Scott here, unfortunately, to go on details about his personal experience with the hands-on, maybe, Adam, you can talk about what you were able to discuss with Bandai Namco about Tales of Arise and go into what you were able to get out of them about this new cure point system.
So yeah, I got a chance to speak with Yusuke Tomizawa about Tales of Arise, and I asked him, a handful of questions just about the game, their approach to it, and things of that nature. And in terms of the cure points thing, like so a lot of Tales mechanics, are borrowed or have been seen before in the series. Like, oh, okay, it's this mechanic again. Like, for example, Tales of Arise has the soul gauge, which are the little diamonds from Tales of Berseria in terms of how arts work in battle. So that's not new. I mean, it might be tweaked a bit, but it's like, okay.
It's from Tales of Rebirth as well. They have a diamond system.
Oh, the diamond system? Yeah. Where you basically like pick them up in battle and you can fill them other ways, and that's how you get currency to basically spend to perform attacks. But there's also this cure point system, which as far as I know is no other game in the series has a system like this. So how it works, how I understand it, I did not play the demo, but I talked about it with the producer, is that you have a gauge. It's called cure points, which that name almost feels like a misnomer to me in some ways. It's CP, and it's shared among the party. So it's not like each person has a cure point meter. It's for the whole party. And how it works is if you are in battle, that's the meter you spend to do like healing arts. So it doesn't come out of your soul gauge. It comes out of this cure point pool. And also, if you happen to like die in battle, you are revived, and it costs cure points. Like it'll just automatically spend some cure points and you'll be revived. I don't know how often you're going to be dying in battle, but I guess that's what happens. And then, kind of interestingly, also these cure points, as you're going through a dungeon area, you'll run into things. The example the producer gave was just like a wall that you might want to knock down in an area. But in order to do that, you have to spend some cure points to do it. That's where it kind of feels like a misnomer to me. Like you spend cure points to knock down a wall. Like, okay, sure. And apparently these open like secret rooms or secret paths, shortcuts, things of that nature. So not like required areas, but zones that might have extra weapons or money or items or whatnot. And it becomes, I guess, a bit of a resource management thing where you decide, do you want to spend these or not to knock down walls? And if you want to heal up your cure points, you have to do that through items or cooking. And there's no other way to get them back. So
do you want to know the real answer to all this, though? Just buy a shitload of gels, and so you never have to use those cure points, only for the exploration part of it. There's no more choice. It's just like, I hope my party likes gels.
Because there's no TP mechanic, and now like the classic orange pineapple gels instead heal this party-based meter called cure points.
Oh, do gels only heal cure points, not hit like health anymore?
Well,
I think there's health gels.
Yeah, like apple. Let's see, my tails knowledge on it. Apple and orange gels will do health, and now pineapple and whatever the other. I'm getting my gels mixed up.
Orange,
The gels,
oranges is for TP. Apple is for HP.
there you go.
Yeah.
So the ones that are normally TP are now cure points.
And there's like a mixed version.
But say like if you always wanted to have cure points to not miss out on any secrets or whatnot, I guess what you would do is just like rely on like apple gels to make sure to take care of health, and then use your cure points for like only the secret rooms and not have to sacrifice that mechanic.
It's
On
kind of
paper,
weird
I
how
guess.
like all the resource management of this new cure point system will kind of come down to how readily available these gels are. Because if you can just kind of pretty easily stock up on money and gels, and just always have a stockpile on hand, and then like anytime you come across this gap or this wall you want to break down or this whatever in a dungeon, and you're just like, oh, I want this item, so I'm just gonna chug down an apple gel or orange gel and then have enough cure points to get this secret, I'm going to go get it. And then it ends up kind of just making the whole management of this new system sort of meaningless. It just seems weird on paper. I don't know like how the game benefits from
the
this.
economy. Just have everyone on 1 HP always and just like, okay, you're still alive, just never get hit.
There you go.
So
you only need 1 HP to stay alive.
So it's possible this cure point system might just be a big nothing, but it kind of sticks out because it's different.
Mm-hmm.
No other game has a system quite like that. It's also, I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but I'm hoping that the explorable field areas, dungeons, things like that are improved over Berseria, because I think that was very obviously the weakest part of that game are these kind of copy-pasted fields and hallway dungeons. It's just kind of wasn't very
drab
interesting. Like
environments.
the battles were fine. The story, like, a lot of people like the characters. But the actually like exploring the zones in that game is just really kind of just dull. So I also asked Tomizawa about the exploration a bit, and he didn't offer a lot of insight. But he said there's things like you can swim, you can jump in terms of exploration, things you can interact with. There's going to be mini games. So
there's no Sonic spin dash to get around faster or anything.
I don't think so.
Damn it.
I also asked him about the skits, because I know people were interested in that. And this isn't really surprising, but essentially, the Tales of Arise now uses a different sort of skit style, where instead of using these sort of 2D anime like portraits, now it's the actual models themselves doing things in the environment. And his answer to essentially how are skits working in this game is effectively, he wanted to use these new 3D models because they like the models, but also for things like if you're using costumes or attachments, now they'll show up in skits, because obviously you can't do that with a portrait. And if it's daytime or nighttime, because there's a day or night system, that'll also be reflected in the skit, depending on, like, if it's at night when the skit activates, you'll see it at night. And I guess there might also be, because skits can oftentimes take place anywhere. Sometimes they're location context sensitive, sometimes not, but there might be skits that, depending on where it takes place or where you happen to activate it at, that it'll also take into account the environment you're in for that. So if it's like a snow area or a field area or whatever. So that's sort of the rationale for the new skit system, is like it reflects your characters and where they are more than they did before. So
and what costumes
it's definitely different. Yeah, and the costumes. So if you put on those like school costumes they always have, or the swimsuit costumes they always have.
I never liked that idea though. It's like people like dress up their character the most silliest way possible in this really serious cutscene. It just takes away like the immersion. It's like
I've never been a fan of that.
I like costumes that are just like alternate designs, like that would fit the world. Like, oh, okay, so here's the normal design, and here's a costume that's sort of like an alternate design that still makes sense, but not like, I'm now in a maid costume. Like, oh,
well, I remember I was playing Scarlet Nexus a couple months ago, and I always kept my characters in like their default costume, because I didn't really care to like change it up. And then I will go to watch some YouTube videos because I want to like compare voice acting or rewatch a scene that I maybe didn't understand at first. And I see people just like earnestly playing in these weird, gaudy like attachment, and obviously Scarlet Nexus is like from Tales developers, so I'm not surprised that you can sort of see some common DNA there. And they just kind of have their whole roster in like these gaudy, weird costumes, and that's just something I've never done. Like I might do like an attachment here or there, or like an alternate color scheme, but never like here's this character now dressed like a maid or in a swimsuit. I've never really been interested in that.
You're like playing like Final Fantasy 14. It's like you'll see this character dressed in like a BDSM costume playing the final boss or something.
I wasn't go that far. My favorite is I remember watching. This is a weird tangent, but I'll line it up. Don't worry. Adam was playing Final Fantasy 13 too, and he always had his characters in the Mass Effect cameo costumes because they had like the best stats. So that was like the only reason he was using those. So now like whenever I think of Sarah or Noel, I think of them in these Mass Effect N7 armors, which doesn't make any sense really. But
well, it's sort of I sort of like headcanoned it as like we are like space patrol time shifting
time cops,
like cops or squad or something.
But yeah,
that game is silly enough. I also think of like I know people who play like the Trails of Cold Steel games with the haha speech bubbles above their head.
Oh yeah, those are funny. Yeah, it's so dumb.
Like, I wouldn't do it, but you do you.
I was gonna say I just recently played through East 9, and they give you like those alternate color schemes, which are usually like not subtle.
It's a palette swap.
But they're palette swaps, but beyond that, they go like for like neon pastel, really bright colors most of the time. It's not just like turn brown hair to black hair. It's like turn brown hair to pink hair or cyan blue hair and like really bright costumes. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't need this. I'll just keep you in your default outfit.
I do wonder if Tales of Arise, because of the dynamic nature of skits now and being able to use like their in-game models and whatever the weather conditions like reflecting it. If they'll have like a Xenoblade 2 or Definitive Edition type of feature where you can like rewatch those skits, but like set like the weather and what costumes you want the characters to be in. Because they have like the event theater type stuff in those games where you can kind of like customize the scene the way you want it to and rewatch them like that.
I do know that in Scott's preview for this game, he also briefly mentioned the combat felt a little bit stiff, and that you have basically 3 arts that you can shortcut for attacking while on the ground, and then 3 aerial arts, and that's it. Where normally in a lot of Tales games, you have a lot more options than that, and they're not limited to being aerial or not. Well, sometimes they are, like certain characters are kind of designed as aerial characters. I'm thinking like Judith, where a lot of her arts...
Judith is really funny to like learn her.
Yeah, but I guess in Tales of Arise, it seems like basically you have 3 shortcuts for on the ground and 3 in the air. They did mention that according to the producer that there were some options not available in what Scott was able to play versus the final release of the game in terms of art shortcuts. I don't know if that's going to make it to this August 18th public demo or not, but basically I guess there's been some reservations on the way that combat system works, but I don't want to judge it too fairly because what we've seen and experienced so far might not line up with the release. But
yeah, so with some RPGs like this, the combat system and other, coordinating subsystems sometimes evolve pretty significantly throughout the course of the game, whereas how the game looks to play and feels to play in hour 5 is very different than what it looks and feels to play in like hour 40, where it evolves a lot. I know in terms of the Tales series, Vesperia is actually kind of like that. Vesperia is somewhat clunky early on, especially relative to like later games, but it evolves quite a bit throughout the series as you literally unlock skills to chain more arts together, to do fatal strikes and other combinations and things you can do in that game. So it's very possible that the demo that Scott played it was early on, and that it could be a pretty simple, basic combat system early, but it might evolve pretty significantly after that, and it's just hard to say until you play it yourself.
Well, we kind of discussed that a little bit in a different way with Fantasian a bit, where early on it's just really trying to establish here are the core principles. We're not going to like twist or stretch them just yet, just making sure you got the fundamentals down before we really start playing with the ideas. So yeah, one of those things I think we should probably be prudent to kind of reserve judgment. But yeah, so that's a series of features up on the site. It is Scott's hands-on impressions. We've got Adam's interview with Tomizawa. We got obviously the news snippet just introducing that the demo is coming on August 18th. The demo is only on console. it's for PlayStation and Xbox, not on PC. Probably wary of data mining or leaks or people somehow getting past like the limitations. We've seen other demos have that issue where they unlock the full game through some sneakiness. And then we also have actually Scott put up a feature about the specific cure point system and how it works, how it's different from TP, some initial thoughts on it, even though we don't have the full breadth of how it's incorporated quite yet. But so
yeah, I'm really excited to get my hands on it in a few days. I think a lot of us are really curious about the game, and by the time the next podcast episode's gonna roll around, we're gonna have a lot more thoughts of like not actually having played the game, just our initial first thoughts on it. I think it's also cool that it's like being released simultaneously. I thought it was gonna be released like in Scarlet Nexus fashion, where Xbox would get it first, then Sony, because I think Xbox also has a marketing deal for Arise.
But yep, September 10th, so less than a month for full release, and obviously the demo next week.
I also asked Tomizawa a very important question. I asked him at the very end of my interview, will there be more re-releases of previous Tales games in the series? Because there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are old.
And a lot of them were never localized.
Yeah, and he basically said, it's possible. So let your imaginations run wild.
That's as good as confirmation, Adam. It's happening.
Yeah. Okay.
I mentioned this to Adam when I gave a read over his interview and got to that question. But I also there's this Tales of YouTube channel they've been running for all the Tales stuff for the mobile games and the marketing for Arise and whatnot. And then throughout that they share survey results with the primarily Japanese audience. Since like a big anniversary year for Tales, they say who's your favorite characters, what are your favorite scenes, and in the Tales games. And then that particular video, like this is all English captioned as well. For the number one spot in that most emotional favorite Tales video, Tales of Rebirth won it with a very important famous scene in that game, and fans love that. And what really stuck out to me is Tales of Rebirth never got localized in the West, and who knows if it ever will. It should. It's a PS2 game, but they went through the effort of making like translated English captions for this particular scene in Tales of Rebirth, and it's like, wow, that's kind of weird that you would do that. Like, you didn't have to, but that's cool.
In terms of news for this week, a lot of the news about this Tales of Arise, the interviews, and the upcoming demo pretty much was the headliner. We do have a couple other things, a lot of it in terms of release dates, a few other smaller announcements, especially if you've become a fan of Apple Arcade, because out of necessity in order to play Fantasian. We've got another surprise entry that's coming to the Apple service, and that is a Castlevania title, Grimoire of Souls. Josh, teach me about what is Grimoire of Souls.
Grimoire of Souls is a weird one. This is initially announced for iOS, not Apple Arcade. It was back in 2018, and they had like a TGS 2019 trailer and whatnot. And this is like your standard free-to-play mobile game with a gacha system and whatnot. And from what I understand, it as far as Western releases, I think it had like a closed beta in Canada. I think like maybe 2 years ago, but now it's being resurrected as like an Apple Arcade exclusive. And it's following a very similar trajectory to Platinum Games' World of Demons. If you remember, it was several years ago already, but there was this big blowout on World of Demons out of nowhere from big gaming outlets saying, "Hey, here's a new mobile game from Platinum Games," and it was the game that has like a Inkbrush Okami-esque art style with the typical Platinum Games action gameplay, but then you're summoning like spirits in battle to kind of do elemental attacks and whatnot. And from I played a little bit of that, like a few hours of that on Apple Arcade when I first got my subscription, and it's like it's okay as like a mobile game, but it still had like that very gacha game UI on it, and I felt that very weird. It's like, oh, there's no stamina system, but there are certain like currencies you have that you can definitely see. They're like, oh, you were supposed to gacha for these like
the vestiges of what it was originally designed as.
Yeah, now it's like kind of all locked off on like these in-game achievements, and like you gain resources back from those achievements, and then you're using these resources to unlock several things. And it just felt very disjointed. I was like, I don't know, this is kind of weird. So Grimoire of Souls is like, I'm not sure exactly how its gacha system worked. I remember it did have one. I think it was like either for items or weapons or whatnot. But for actual gameplay, you have like like heroes and heroines from the past Castlevania games going through Castlevania levels, 2D Castlevania levels. And I'm kind of curious to see how this will shape up in Apple Arcade. I really hope it feels less like mobile game X gacha game esque in its presentation, because I really don't like. I don't know, for some reason how my mind works. Like, I really don't like if a game like comes out and cool, there's no gacha system, but don't leave like the UI and presentation kind of like the remains of what once was, because you can definitely see of like, oh, this system was supposed to be this if this was a gacha game now.
Where you can see where it was stripped out or whatever.
Yeah,
pretty clearly.
So I think this news is kind of. I'm interested. I definitely want to give it a shot. And who knows?
So here are some details from Gamatsu. It was the first announced for iOS in 2018. It did soft launch in Canada in September 2019 and was delisted a year later. And I think it's been silent since then until Konami announced that it is coming to Apple Arcade soon. And that's kind of it. And you can even tell by kind of like the press release for it that play as a la carte and unlock other legendary characters such as Simon Belmont, Maria, et cetera. So it's like, I could already sort of see like where this game initially was conceived as like trying to be like a who's who amongst Castlevania fans on in terms of being, do you unlock your favorite character or whatever. But Apple, no release date, no release window, just coming to Apple Arcade soon. Apple Arcade is a subscription service, as I know, because I'm going to have to re-up it if I want to get back to Fantasian. I want
to play this. This sounds cool, maybe.
It is kind of interesting to see like these once giant big series like making their way to these other kind of avenues where people can play it.
Well, I'll at least download it myself since, well...
You got a subscription, why not?
To justify the money I spent on this thing.
Yep. I guess, remember they said Fantasian Part 2 is coming soon. It was like a week later, so maybe like sometime next week this will drop. And it's like, okay, cool.
At this point, might as well expect it. Speaking of new surprising mobile entries in Legacy series, we got an announcement of a new Shining Force game. So Shining Force is back with a new mobile game releasing worldwide next year, which is Shining Force Heroes of Light and Darkness, due out in the first half of 2022. So I don't know. I think Chow has got some insight on Shining Force, and maybe Josh as well. I don't know. How long has it been since we've seen Shining Force? What do we think of this new mobile entry up on the way?
Well, I think the last Shining Force, it's basically we've been playing spin-offs. We've been playing the Tony Taka character design spin-offs, which is more like I think. Yeah. Shining Resonance, which is more like a action RPG spin-offs. Because the main series is a tactical RPG, which is basically Sega's answer to Fire Emblem back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no permadeaths in Shining Force from what I remembered, but it's more of like an RPG driven experience because you can like move and travel to new locations, right? And there'll be like inns and place to stop, not like Fire Emblem where it's more like it's like a skirmish that you just keep on going, right?
So what does this mean for a new mobile title, Chow?
Is it their answer to Fire Emblem Heroes, maybe?
Oh man, maybe. It does have heroes in the title.
Oh jeez. This doesn't sound good at all. I'm pretty scared.
Okay. In a world where you were excited for this, what would you want in it?
A world I'm excited in?
In a world where you're excited for the Shining Force mobile game, what would you want in this?
That's a very tough question.
I've touched a Shining Force game, but I haven't really. My memories are so fuzzy of it.
The only thing I want from the Shining Force series is like a remake of Free. Like if they put the entire franchise, remake it, because what happened with the original series, it was released on the Sega Saturn, And for the first game, they were worried that the Saturn was going to bomb, and it did. So they have a closure ending. They changed the translation somewhere near the end so that it has closure in case the sequels don't come out.
You're probably right. Yeah.
So if they have an opportunity to redo the Shining Force series, I would hope they do like a reboot of 3 and just have the entire series come out here instead of how they did with 3 with the closure.
This is what happens. It's just releasing worldwide. They're just going to confirm, like, hey, there's still a big Shining Force audience internationally. Now it's time. And then everything the future of Shining Force hinges upon the success of this mobile game.
Hey, who knows? Maybe they can cover this little sequel bait that they left off at the end of 3. It has this huge sequel bait that they left people hanging for all these years that never went resolved.
All right, Shining Force fans, it's your time next year. If you want to see Shining Force back, then get out your phones.
And according to Gamasu's translation of the initial Japanese announcement from gamer.ne.jp, it will launch in the first half of 2022 as a free-to-play title with item-based in-app purchases.
Oh, yeah.
With the development is in development with the goal of bringing the strategy and fun of tactical RPGs to mobile devices. So it sounds very much like Brave Exvius or potentially Fire Emblem Heroes. I read that sort of description and I'm immediately like just uninterested.
Like, I had no issues with Fire Emblem Heroes when it first launched. I thought it was a pretty fun game. It's just that the power creep got a little out of control eventually. So every time when you roll a new unit, it's like the next week your unit's already been power crept, and it was just impossible to keep up.
I love mobile games. Woo!
Yeah.
I feel like I don't have a leg to stand on as I'm still having my my near reincarnation team auto battle as we record the podcast.
Speaking of that game, is like, how's your progress in it?
I don't want to go too in deep, but basically I'm just slowly poking away at trying to make sure I kind of keep up with the story and not get behind. They recently announced some of the stuff with the Japanese half anniversary, and I don't know. I just want to make sure that I stay up to date on it, kind of out of obligation.
The most recent developments is in that half anniversary stream. They had like the head of this near reincarnation game, Yokotaro and Saito fishing, and that was the best part of the half anniversary stream was them fishing.
Like literally fishing, like out on a river.
Yeah, they're literally fishing. Yep.
Yeah, I'm already a failed gamer. I failed a near fishing game. If anyone is curious,
you can do it, man. I believe in you.
The last bit of non-release date related news for the week is Super Robot Wars 30. So we already talked about this getting a surprise worldwide release, at least on PC in October. It will also allow the ability to use custom background music. So this is something that is near and dear to Josh and Kite, 2 contributors to the site.
Yeah,
it's kind of a cool quality of life thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just reconfirming that they had that feature back at the 3 recent releases in V, X, and T. So for people who were kind of, I don't know why, but for people who were scared that feature has been removed because now they're selling that the premium sound edition in the West. Like, even though they still had that feature despite having a premium sound edition in Japan previously, it's still in there, just making sure it's confirmed. For the premium sound edition is only really there for like if you really want to cut out the work of making sure it sounds up, like they have like snippets of the original music but like perfectly like cut to like fit battle scenes and certain scenes and whatnot. If you don't want to go through that legwork, or you want to use other music that's not present in the game, so if you want to do like the Sailor Moon theme instead or any other music you may have, you can just do that very easily on both PC and PS4. I wonder how PS5 is going to handle it. Hopefully PS5 is going to handle it easily. But all you have to do is just get a USB thumbstick drive, put in like have a certain folder name, and then put the MP3s in there, and then they're like selectable in the game. And then you can just like kind of like you can assign it up to like which attacks you want to play which BGM. So say like the original Gundam has like a saber attack and like a laser rifle attack. You can like assign different songs for both that sword attack and that laser rifle attack. So you can go as minute as that, which is, cool, very flexible system, easy to use. So, and like they have like an in-game volume setting as well. If it's too low or too high, you can actually set it in game to like adjust the volume, how you'd like it as well. So it's cool that it's back. Nothing too big, but Good to know.
The Switch version of the game, it's not releasing worldwide. That'll be for Asia or Southeast Asia. Will not support it, but the PC version, which is worldwide, and the PlayStation version will.
Yeah, the only PC versions worldwide, and then
Right.
PlayStation and Switch are just Southeast Asia only for English.
Mhm. And now we've got a string of release dates to go over. Most of these are ports or PC only releases. So we'll just kind of swing through them and see what we think. So the first one is that Fantasian Part 2 launched on August 13th. It actually ended up launching a bit early, but very surprised because we went like within a 2-week span, more like a 1.5 week span, where it's like Part 2 is nearly done to out early immediately. So kind of creeped up really quickly out of nowhere. Obviously, we've already had some discussion on that, and more of us planning to get into it pretty soon. One game that has been in a few of like the Steam and indie based like demo festivals is Eastward. This is the Chucklefish published game that has very much drawn comparisons to like that Earthbound type urban fantasy sort of vibe. I've seen also some people compare it to like Western Kids cartoons. Is coming out on September 16th for a Nintendo Switch and PC. I've heard a lot of good things from people who played the various demos of Eastward. It was also featured in Nintendo's recent Indie World Showcase. That's actually where this news comes from. Seems like a fun little quirky game that, is kind of landing at a good time for these sorts of games that could potentially end up under the radar. Has anyone here gone hands-on with any of the Eastward demos?
No, I haven't yet. It looks really cool though. It's from the
I'm interested in
Shanghai
playing
Beast
it, but I never check out the demo. I don't like playing demos because usually it gives you pretty different impression from the final product, I feel.
Sometimes the Steam demo system is kind of weird where it's like you got a week to play it, and at that point I'm just kind of like not interested. And whenever they put like that timetable on it, I'm just like, nah, I'll just wait. But I know that
it's also weird. Like you mentioned that, and it's also weird because like a lot of those, a good chunk of those demos like don't abide by it too, where it says, "Oh, you only have limited time to play it," but then once that day comes, like a good portion of them still stay up. Like there's like, oh, well, and there's like no uniform like rule that says you have to take it down when it's time. Like some of them are just like, oh, I'll just leave it up, and then you guys can just play it at your own time. So it's like those Steam demo festivals are always such a weird event for me because like it's like you have like 4 days and there's like 500 demos available. So if you really want to check out games, well, good luck.
And now sometimes you don't know if a demo you're playing is a year away or 5 years away. You don't really know like how far along it is. Maybe you can sometimes glean some ideas, but you don't know like, am I going to be waiting this game for forever, or am I playing a demo for a game that I'll be playing the full release of in 6 months? I don't know. But yep, so Eastward is coming out on September 16th. Also in September, we have a surprise Switch port of Darksiders 3. So a little bit out of nowhere, but also maybe expected because the Switch has seen ports for the War Mastered edition of Darksiders 1 and then a port of Darksiders 2. Darksiders 3 coming to the system does make some sense. I originally reviewed this game.
What did they do Darksiders 2 again?
I thought I got a port of Darksiders 2 on Switch.
No, it did. But like, what was that called? The edition called again for Darksiders 2?
What did it actually get it? Oh, definitive, only replacing the first syllable with death. Definitive edition.
Yeah.
As far as I know, Darksiders 3 does not have a silly subtitle. Just Darksiders 3. So I reviewed this game when it first launched in like 2019 or so. I thought it was all right. It's the thing about Darksiders that's kind of weird is that the only thing that really ties them together is like their art style. It's that kind of Western comic book sort of flair to it. A very edgy. If you're like a teenager, you'd probably really be into it, or just like a dumb adult like me. But Darksiders 3 kind of does something that the first two games didn't do, where it's very much a very it's Souls-like. Sorry, shoot me for using that terminology, but it has the sort of thing where enemies will respawn every time you like get to a healing point and upgrade your stats. You pick up like these white items off of corpses that end up being like gear items, very much like in the Souls series, where Darksiders 2 was more of a Diablo-like with a loot-based system, and then Darksiders 1 was more of a Zelda-like with like a more like key and lock sort of system where you get certain tools that allow you to progress through certain dungeons. So each Darksiders has kind of taken like a different tact of what their inspiration is, which I think in itself is kind of interesting, where you don't have like whenever you talk about what could Darksiders 4 or the future of the series be, it could look like a different.
It's gonna be a visual novel for
It's gonna be a
Darksiders
gotcha
4.
game.
Ooh, why not both?
There you go. But yeah, Darksiders 3 I thought was pretty good. Not great. Now it's on Nintendo Switch. So if you play the first two games and you thought you were interested in the story, Darksiders 3 is again another kind of semi prequel, like it doesn't push the narrative along. The big cliffhanger at the end of Darksiders 1 is still a cliffhanger. And Darksiders 3 just kind of gives you more context from the perspective of another one of the writers. Launching in October is an isometric CRPG called Disciples Liberation. So this is a game that I've kind of had my eyes on, just in terms of its marketing over the last couple of years. I don't have a lot of history with the series, but this looks kind of like a pretty high budget sort of take on the genre. Very, very Western high fantasy.
One second. You called it a CRPG, but it looks like it's more just tactical RPG. I mean, it is a computer.
Well, they kind of have common DNA because now these CRPGs are often incorporating like turn-based modes, which are only like a step removed from being tactical in nature. It's coming out in October from Calypso Media, so I haven't really been following it too closely, but it is something that's sort of been on my radar. I don't know, like if I'll have the space for it in October to play through it, but I don't know. I think it looks interesting.
I don't know much about the series, unfortunately. It's a PC-centric series. I do know that the developer is new now. So people who I have seen concerns from people who have played the series that it's a new developer's take on it. So they're not so certain about that. And also, I was also interested in I like tactical RPGs. Maybe I'll try this out. And then they're boasting like 80 to 100 hours of gameplay. And that to me, that's like, I don't want to just fit in 80 hours of gameplay on a curiosity, just that's a lot.
Yeah, sometimes these you have to kind of get invested in terms of you can't just jump in and out. Sometimes in these turn-based games, they just end up being kind of long in the tooth where you're not going to be in and out in 20 hours. You got to have to really commit to it. Which kind of goes into one of the other announcements of a similar-ish game. This is more of a pure CRPG. Sorry for mislabeling Disciples, but Pathfinder: Wrath of the Righteous. It's coming out on September 2nd. That's a release date that we knew about. That one is getting a console release, which is also not a surprise because the original Pathfinder Kingmaker also eventually got a console release. Wrath of the Righteous will release for console in 2022. And that one I know is going to be another one of those long in the tooth games because playing through Pathfinder Kingmaker is about legitimately a 100-hour experience if you want to play start to finish. So I'm expecting Wrath of the Righteous to be a similarly beefy game. Now, one thing that Wrath of the Righteous is doing out of the gate that Kingmaker didn't do is that it is launching with the turn-based mode. And even though the turn-based mode isn't specifically designed for this, I do feel like that does kind of go hand in hand with the console release because sometimes with the controller input, doing the real time with pause just isn't conducive to that sort of interface if you don't have a mouse and keyboard handy. So I do think that launching with the turn-based capability is allowing it to go to console a bit quicker. I think it'll be more conducive for that system. But of course, you're not locked into it. Whether you're playing on PC or next year on console, you can decide to go with the turn-based or the real-time. And one thing that is kind of cool that I've seen people talk about with the betas is that you can change it on the fly. Where if you're doing a battle that is more difficult and you really have to slow it down, instead of just pausing between every action, you just kind of do the natural thing and switch over to turn-based, and you can actually be much more cautious and careful. Where if it's more trash mobs or you already have a strategy that works really efficiently, you can go to real time and clear through it a bit quicker. So less than a month away for this one, and it's one that I've been interested in and looking forward to for pretty much all year.
I know. I think that Wrath of the Righteous gets rid of the kingdom building mode of the original game, which I know some people are happy about. But it now has a crusade mode, which is sort of like an RTS kind of broader scale grand strategy sort of thing.
I've heard it compared to Heroes of Might and Magic, which I have no experience in. And sort of in that degree command armies across the battlefield from a really high perspective. So I'm interested in it, but I kind of just wish that I feel like they just focused on. I just hope it doesn't feel superfluous because the kingdom mode in Kingmaker I felt didn't really add a whole lot. You put a lot of time into it to end up getting very, very minute benefits where it's if you're in an area of the world map controlled by your kingdom, your characters get +1 agility or something like that, where it felt really, really kind of minor. So I don't know if I just rather like what direction do I want them to go in? Do I want to make it feel like that this Heroes of Might and Magic mode really is integral to the experience of the game, or do I just kind of wish that they kind of cut the chafe out entirely and just focused on the RPG aspects and the combat aspects? So that is one thing that is right now to me. I have not played the betas, or I have not really seen how this feature is implemented. Is it going to feel like a side thing, or is it going to really feel like an integral part of the game? I hope obviously it's the later, but the precedent from the Kingdom mode in the first game doesn't give me a ton of confidence. So we'll see. I also just hope that the game launches in a much better state, just performance-wise. When Kingmaker first launched, it was incredibly buggy. I couldn't even reach the credits because I had basically locked myself out of finishing the game. Unfortunately, I've heard from the betas that things are still really, really kind of hot out of the oven. So hopefully by launch, they've got that mostly ironed out, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's still kind of on edge. We got a surprise port for a game that we talked about earlier in the year, Loop Hero, which was one of the Devolver Digital published titles that we looked at back in March or so. We actually did a short video on it on our YouTube channel under our casual mode series. Loop Hero is coming to Switch as well, also revealed in Nintendo's recent Indie World showcase. So it went on to sell 500,000 copies on PC. We thought it had a lot of interesting ideas. We might have even mentioned at the time that it might have been a good fit for Switch in terms of like the bite-size kind of gameplay loop of that game, pun intended. But yeah, so Loop Hero will come to Switch this year.
I do wonder how the user interface and the controls will translate for the Switch version. Because when I was playing it, I played with a keyboard and a mouse, and I felt like, yeah, this is kind of like almost an integral part of the game. Like controlling it like this, because you have to, you're constantly manually having to place like card tiles on the board and like filling out like your gameplay or your game rather, giving you bonuses and harvesting resources and whatnot. And that's kind of even on mouse, like that was kind of like intensive and like a lot of micromanagement on that and making sure that you have everything in place and ready to go. So I'm really interested to see how they'll handle that on Switch.
One final release date, or at least release window, is that we do know that Metal Slug Tactics will release for Switch and PC next year in 2022. This was originally announced as part of the Summer Game Fest from way back in June, I think. Feels like a long time ago.
Way back in June.
Yeah, it feels like forever ago, but this was part of the Jeff Keighley's produced thing that was like the E3 sub replacement sort of thing. At the time, we weren't quite sure whether this was a tactical game or an RPG or a combination of both. We did get a new trailer for it, a new set of descriptions, and obviously the announcement of the release window next year as part of, again, the Nintendo Indie World Showcase. And it turns out it will have some RPG sort of elements along with some roguelike elements. So kind of an interesting take on the something that Metal Slug never was. It's kind of an interesting. We at the time we kind of talked about it. I don't think we covered it on the site, but I think we talked about it either on the cast or just in chat. How it seemed really faithful to the original series artistically, even though it was taking a different tact gameplay wise. So now we have a little bit more of an idea of how it will play. It's a roguelike tactical RPG, aptly named Metal Slug Tactics, PC and Switch next year.
So weird. It just is so weird. Yeah,
combination of a bunch of weird buzzwords there, but I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting take. It's not a gacha game as far as I know, so it doesn't have that attached to it yet.
We don't know yet. Nothing can be said for sure until we get our hands on it.
It does seem kind of weird that the way they describe this is that it takes what makes Metal Slug so special and unique and brings it to the tactical genre. It's like, wait, how can you? That's like having your cake and eating it too, like where it's faithful to the original games, but we're trying something different. I don't. Can't you just say you're trying something different? I don't know.
No, people don't like different things, so they have to put those words in. Like, oh, okay, you said faithful, so you're good.
Yeah, so I know some people immediately saw this news post and were like, roguelike, I'm immediately not interested. But I don't know. I've seen a few takes on that. So obviously, we've had like Hades and Returnal kind of mess with the idea and kind of bring that sort of idea into more popular, more in vogue. So I don't know. I'm okay with other series kind of testing their toes in the water, seeing if it's a good fit for their ideas and their conceptions, and maybe slapping Metal Slug on it will work out well. Will work out fine. So
there's the prime time to re-release Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, dude. And people like roguelikes again.
Hell yeah.
So, see?
Yep, that'll come out next year at some point. And that kind of covers us for the news for the week. Again, kind of a slow period of the year, but we did have a few surprise announcements for August and September release dates, including Fantasian, which is out now if you have an Apple device. If you don't, you just gotta be a mark like one of us and go get one just to play Fantasian or wait for
Not Oregon Trail.
Oh, man,
yes,
I
Oregon Trail is
Oregon Trail.
also available on Apple Arcade, as is the Okami-like Platinum Games game, whose title has already escaped me.
All the demons.
Thank you, World of Demons, and an upcoming Castlevania game at some point that is no longer a gacha game, but might still feel like one. We'll see. As always, thank you for listening. You can go up onto our site at rpgsite.net to read all the features that we talked about in terms of the Monster Hunter movie impressions, the Tales of Arise hands-on impressions, our interview there, as well as all the news that we talked about today. We're also on all the usual haunts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under RPG Site. You'll probably find us pretty easily. We do have a Discord channel, discord.gg/RPG Site. So if you want to talk about any of these games or other games that were released recently, like Monster Hunter Rise, Stories 2, Neo, The World Ends With You, Nier titles, whether it's Replicant or Reincarnation, feel free to hop on and join the discussion there. And we host this podcast seemingly every week. So we will be back next week with probably more thoughts on Fantasian and maybe a few surprises otherwise that we can't predict. So until then, take care, stay safe. We'll talk to you next time.
Fighting Force stands, rise up.